Philosophers talk to our times, towards an ethnography of a self-poisoning mind. I'm beginning to finish this series in my own head, but I want to do one or two things before I do finish it. I ought to talk about epilepsy, and how it seems to me that as much as drug use, epilepsy has become the paradigm for our times, and we are quietly driving ourselves bonkers. Now, here, my personal confession. I am some species, or at least I have a diagnosis for epilepsy. I could take shit-hard drugs if I really wanted to. I never do. Because it's one of my paradigms. I refuse to take drugs. So I refuse to take drugs to stop me having illegal experiences, which is what the drugs do. From what I've already said, you can bet your bottom dollar. I am not a violent, difficult epilepsy. It's not something that particularly troubles me. I am incredibly lucky that way. I have had a tonic-clonic, so that's what you mean by epilepsy, once in my life. When it's had the privilege of putting me in hospital for 4 days, well, actually it was 6 days, it was 7 days, but I was 3 days in intensive care, and triggered a major psychotic episode. So it's probably just as well I don't get them at all, often. I rather think that it was unique. Be that as it may, one of the things that epilepsy does for me is that it gives you a strange vision. You see, when I'm caught up in an episode, I literally drown in déjà vu, which, fascinating here in France, is no more a thing than French windows are a thing. It just means that which is already seen. Never mind, it was very disappointing trying to explain déjà vu to a doctor. The point is, that feeling we get from time to time, that we've already seen it before, that we've done it before, for me becomes a demented thing. It presses down into everything that I am, and so that I feel that I'm making an account of what has already been. And yet, at the same point, sanity slips. And for me, with my philosophical hat on, this is the really interesting bit. Because you get to see for a moment, or sometimes for quite a long time, about 5 minutes, everything blanks, and you get to see the demented structure, the crazy, mad structure that allows thought to be possible. At least that's what it always feels to me. A sequence of non sequiturs, of parallel processes, of thought not thought, of things you know are utterly wrong, and yet in that moment feel like they are the truth. Now, what you want to make of that, I don't care. We could call it the unconscious, and this was the real world one was suppressing, but that would be so boring. What it feels like to me, sometimes, is that these are, what you're seeing is the structure that makes thought possible. And it's not a lovely Kantian logical structure. It's a wild, mad structure full of parallel thinking and oddities of thought. But it's also just as possible that as the present is being necessarily confused with the past, the entire thing becomes demented. Short-term and long-term memory become totally confused, shuffled if you like, so that you're no longer sure where you are or when you are. And you are aware that all your memories, all your long-term memories are shuffling, being shuffled, being shifted. That's probably what I do think it is. And the two versions, that and the idea that it is the structure of one's immediate thought, are not at all contradictory. Because in order to be able to perceive, in order to be able to have a unity of time in any present, you're always shuffling around the pasts. All that happens with my epilepsy is that the cards get scrambled a bit. And you're never quite sure which one goes where. And that is true. The most annoying thing for me about epilepsy is that it scrambles my memories, so that I can no longer find things. In another life, I'm also rather dyspraxic, so I can't keep paper in the same pile without it becoming shuffled. But I've always had my memory, so I don't need to do that. I always had before the epilepsy developed and dyspraxis, my memories. A very, very rigid order where I could find things. But when I first developed epilepsy, when I was in my early 20s, I was late onset, and I first had such experiences, I had to give up philosophy for a year, 2 years. And after my tonic-clonic, I had to give up thinking for a year, almost entirely, because I couldn't find anything in my brain. And any attempt to try to locate long-term past triggered another episode, just a minor one, but it was bad enough, and it scrambled, and it scrambled. And it took me a year of careful shuffling and taking a lot of drugs to sort myself back out. And so now, by and large, I'm all right. In that, unless I'm very tired, I can get up as early as I like. I can get up at 4 if I want to, but I do need to be in bed by 9 in the night, which is a bit of a bore for an adult, but there you are. And I can literally sleep myself into health and plenty. And yeah, I can't drive anymore, but that's okay. Now, what's the point of me telling you all of this boring biographical stuff? Because it seems to me that there is a way, when looking at the way modern society does information, quick flash information where you're never really sure which is in the past and which is in the present, where stories are being endlessly reheated from the past and spun as if they were present. You can see it very clearly on Facebook, or even more on YouTube, where stories that actually were once a long time ago have been given a new date and re-released, as much as anything else, to create content, I think. So that our notions of what is now and what was then has changed, has shifted. More than that, we exist in a world where, in order to attract our attention, it can easily start to feel like an epileptic fit for me. Because it's not just that there's flashing lights, it's that you've got a torrent of information pouring down at you. I never watch action films because they send me to sleep, because they remind me of an epileptic fit. And the same is true for too fast video games. They all do it because they kind of make, there is that feeling where I described epilepsy very slowly as in terms of losing in a deja vu, but you really do drown in it. You drown in not knowing quite which is where, and not being able to process temporal information. And I actually think that's one of the things that technology is doing to us. It becomes very difficult to process information as fast as the computer is flying it at us. And the result, of course, is that we drown in nostalgia. We lose ourselves within the structures of the thought. We say things that are utterly demented because we haven't understood how the entire whole is cohering. So that it seems to me sometimes, and this is just really waving your hands at it, I'm not giving you any analysis here, but it can seem to me in the world where my friends will tell me all sorts of bizarre conspiracies, some of which might be a bit true, most of which are based on something that happened donkeys years ago that I was aware of, and that isn't the case anymore. All that stuff. In a world then where information just straddles at you, real or made up, it feels to me that we're kind of in a perpetual slight epileptic fit. And that is actually a very good way to understand what we have done to ourselves. We've created a society of déjà vu, a society where we're not really sure what's present anymore, a society where we're forever hard up against the very structures of our own thinking, but thought them mad, thought crazy. And so that I often feel that not only was epilepsy a privilege in that it revealed, it feels like revealing, but it illustrated, I suppose, for me, some of the structures of thinking, which, if you're of my turn of mind and vaguely philosophical, are terribly exciting, and allowed me an opportunity to work out how to run a brain differently. It means that I've, over the course of the life, been able to change what I can do quite quickly. And again, I tend to think of that as epilepsy because I can shuffle all the past backwards and forwards. And it seems to me that is the world in which we live today. That is very much what the internet does to us. It shifts and scrambles our brains so that we no longer quite know where our memories were, so that they become plugged into what the computer flashes at us, what Facebook remembers for us. This was you 10 years ago. This was you last year. Where and how we store our memories shifts and changes, becomes no longer something that is purely in ourselves. Its structure then becomes caught up with something that is no longer at all human. I mean, the internet, AI, whatever. That is, it becomes caught up within a sequence of moves that are no longer triggered totally by us. And we are literally pulling ourselves inside out. Now, with epilepsy, that all remains within my brain. I get to see the structure that a brain does. With the internet, of course, we all get to see the structure. We all get to invent a word for it. We call it algorithms that create a system of thinking, of memory, that literally pulls us inside out and gives us a different way to structure thinking. No wonder it drives us a bit bonkers, because it processes information in a bonkers way, because information is processed in a bonkers way, and then we lose ourselves in that bonkersness. I'm not particularly paranoid when I'm drowning in deja vu, but that tells you more about me, I think, than the experience. If I wanted to set myself up as a mystic here in the wild mountains, which I could certainly do, I would be paranoid, because I would be believing its truth. And the minute you would believe the truth of when you're lost in nostalgia, everything becomes a dark and strange dream. And it seems to me that we're close. We're close to that position that that epileptics like me resist the temptation for doing. I mean, what do I mean by that? I mean, I'm genuinely serious. Here in the wilds of the mountains, when I tell people epileptic and I describe my experiences, they'll all go pie-eyed, because they're pursuing drugs to do that. And they will all think of you as some sort of natural mystic if you let them. I don't let them. I'm not interested. I'm not interested because I don't think there is any enlightenment to be had between a brain that's misfiring. Oh, you can learn how a brain works. You can have endless fun doing what I do, which is to play a game of... It's really a game, it's a card game with my epilepsy. At any one time, I would always say I now have 50 cards in my pack and 2 extra jokers. So I'm playing with a smaller pack and 2 jokers. And the game is to always know where the joker is. Because as long as you know where it is, if it must come up, you can control it. But you will try to keep it away from certain situations. Oh, of course, I'm not allowed to drive. I ought to have pointed that out to you, because I don't take my drugs. And so it turns running my brain into a fairly complicated enterprise, where I always have to be aware of what is happening, the shifts, where the memories are. Always want to know where those 2 jokers are. In a pack that isn't quite complete. I hear you say, absolutely. Bully for me, it's terribly exciting. A van has just gone down through my tunnel. It doesn't often do that. But my point is that that's quite easy if you're me running a single brain. But with the current position where we're kind of pulling our brains inside out and projecting them onto online versions of them, which are running epileptic type models, so we get ourselves lost within delirium and lose ourselves within the demented structure of thinking, it no longer becomes clear how you do that. It no longer becomes clear how you sit and shuffle your mind, how you work out where the jokers are, how you keep yourself sane. In fact, the entire thing feels to me to be sometimes an experiment in how to drive yourself mad in easy lessons. Far more than philosophy ever was. People used to accuse me of doing that with philosophy years ago with the epilepsy. Oh, you're only epileptic because you read too much Deleuze. I literally had people say that to me. But for me, that was always about control of my head. Thinking about rethinking my brain and allowing me to rethrow what I am. But to apply that to the internet and to get everybody to do it as they're quietly driving themselves bonkers, becomes a task that is Herculean, but one that we have to try before we do finally drive ourselves absolutely mad.